It was a quiet night in the sleepy town of Ravenswood, where the hum of cicadas filled the warm summer air, and the street seemed deserted except for the faint glow of streetlights. A pair of identical twins, Marcus and Malik Johnson, were driving home after a late-night basketball practice. Their car, an old but reliable sedan inherited from their late father, rolled slowly down the empty road, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Inside the car, the brothers were laughing, their voices animated as they debated the finer points of Marcus's slam dunk versus Malik's clutch three-pointer during practice. The banter was lighthearted, the kind of pure joy that comes from sharing a moment of brotherly camaraderie. But the laughter came to an abrupt halt when the faint blue and red lights began flashing in their rearview mirror. "Is that for us?" Malik asked, his voice tinged with confusion. Marcus frowned, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "We weren't speeding, right? I didn't miss a stop sign." As the patrol car's siren blared, Marcus sighed and pulled over to the side of the road. The brothers exchanged nervous glances, their effortless smiles now replaced by unease. They knew what it felt like to live under a microscope, to have their every move questioned simply because of the color of their skin. But this time, they had done nothing wrong, or so they thought. The officer stepped out of the patrol car, his figure silhouetted against the flashing lights. His gait was slow and deliberate, and something about his posture made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. When the officer reached their window, his flashlight beam was blinding, making it difficult to read his expression. "License and registration," the officer barked, his tone sharp and devoid of courtesy. As Marcus fumbled to retrieve the documents, Malik couldn't help but ask, "Excuse me, officer, may I ask why we're being stopped?" The officer's response was chillingly curt. "Routine check." But his eyes darted suspiciously over the brothers, and the tension in the air was palpable. Moments later, a second patrol car arrived, followed by a third. Backup? The twins exchanged wide-eyed glances as officers poured out, their radios crackling with indecipherable chatter. Why did a simple traffic stop escalate so quickly? What was it about them that warranted such a response? The quiet night had transformed into a spectacle of flashing lights, crackling radios, and a rising tide of fear. Marcus and Malik didn't know it yet, but this encounter was about to change their lives forever. Ravenswood was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where front porch swings creaked with the weight of late-night conversations, and where the local diner served coffee so strong it could keep you awake through a storm. It was unassuming, nestled in the heart of the South, with streets lined by ancient oak trees whose branches stretched toward each other like old friends. Yet beneath the surface of its picturesque charm lay an unspoken tension, a division that rippled through the community like an undercurrent no one wanted to acknowledge. Marcus and Malik Johnson were born and raised in Ravenswood, twin brothers, who were as close as two people could be. From a young age, they were inseparable, their bond forged through shared laughter, whispered secrets, and the challenges of growing up as two black boys in a predominantly white town. Though identical in appearance, dark, curly hair, piercing brown eyes, and lean athletic frames, they couldn't have been more different in personality. Marcus, the older by 6 minutes, was the calm and steady one. He excelled in academics, earning straight A's and the admiration of his teachers. Always thoughtful and measured, Marcus had dreams of becoming an engineer, spending hours tinkering with gadgets in their small garage, turning old radios and discarded electronics into functioning devices. Malik, on the other hand, was the firebrand. Charismatic and fearless, he was the star point guard of the high school basketball team, known for his lightning-fast reflexes and a jump shot that seemed almost magical. Where Marcus was reserved, Malik was bold, often speaking out against injustices in school or on social media. His passion for standing up for what was right earned him both respect and, at times, unwanted attention. Their mother, Deborah, worked tirelessly as a nurse at the local hospital, pulling long shifts to provide for her boys after their father passed away in a tragic accident 5 years ago. She instilled in them the values of hard work, kindness, and resilience, constantly reminding them of their father's words. Never let the world tell you who you are. Show them. Those words echoed in their hearts as they navigated the complexities of growing up. The town of Ravenswood, while quaint, was far from idyllic for the Johnsons. The twins were no strangers to the subtle stares, whispered remarks, and the unspoken rules of how to behave in certain spaces. They had learned to tread carefully, to smile politely, and to keep their hands visible when walking into stores. It was a balancing act that came with being young black men in a place that wasn't entirely ready to embrace them. On that particular evening, the twins had just wrapped up a grueling basketball practice. The gym was Marcus's least favorite place. He'd much rather be in the library or their garage. But he joined Malik because, as his brother often joked, "We came as a set. You can't have one without the other." That night, Malik had been especially fired up, perfecting his crossover dribble and making jokes at Marcus's expense every time he missed a shot. "Maybe engineering's your thing for a reason, bro," Malik teased, dodging Marcus's playful shove. The drive home was supposed to be uneventful, a winding route through darkened streets illuminated by the occasional street lamp. The windows were down, and the humid summer air filled the car as they played music from an old playlist they'd made years ago. Their laughter echoed in the small cabin of the car, a sound so pure it could momentarily make you forget the weight they carried. Daily, the Johnsons' car, a faded blue sedan with a slightly dented bumper, was a relic of their father. Every scratch and stain told a story, from road trips to family picnics to late-night drives when their dad would crank up old soul music and sing along in his rich baritone voice. To the twins, it wasn't just a car. It was a piece of their family, a reminder of the man who taught them to hold their heads high. As they approached a dimly lit stretch of road just outside town, Marcus noticed the faint flicker of headlights in their rearview mirror. At first, he thought nothing of it. It was just another car, probably someone heading home after a late shift. But as the lights drew closer, something in his chest tightened. "Think they're following us?" Malik asked casually, his tone light but his eyes scanning the mirror. "Nah," Marcus replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Why would they? The car behind them sped up momentarily, then slowed again, keeping a deliberate distance. Marcus could feel the weight of Malik's gaze, his brother's usual carefree demeanor replaced by a quiet tension. It was a sensation they both knew too well. The unease of being watched, the discomfort of feeling out of place in their own skin. "Just stay cool," Malik murmured as the flashing lights came on. The twins' street-smart instincts kicked in immediately. Marcus pulled over, his hands gripping the wheel tightly, his pulse quickening. Malik, usually the braver of the two, shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched. They had been taught by their mother how to handle moments like this. Be polite, comply, avoid sudden movements, and keep your voice calm. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to unfold. As the officer's flashlight cut through the darkness, the twins sat in silence, their breaths shallow. Marcus forced himself to meet the officer's stern gaze, while Malik, sitting in the passenger seat, felt the weight of a history they couldn't escape pressing down on them. The quiet night, once filled with the melody of cicadas and the brothers' laughter, now felt suffocating. Something wasn't right, and deep down, both Marcus and Malik could feel it. The storm that had been brewing under Ravenswood's surface for years was about to break, and the Johnson twins were about to find themselves at its center. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as the officer, his face partially obscured by the harsh beam of his flashlight, scrutinized Marcus and Malik. His badge glinted in the light, but his expression remained unreadable, stone-cold and authoritative. "Step out of the vehicle," the officer ordered abruptly, his voice devoid of explanation. Marcus blinked, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "Excuse me, sir?" "I said step out of the vehicle," the officer repeated, his tone firmer now. "What's this about, officer?" Malik interjected, his voice steady but laced with controlled frustration. "We haven't done anything wrong. Can you tell us why we're being stopped?" Instead of answering, the officer's free hand hovered near his holster. "Step out now." Marcus swallowed hard and nodded, his movements deliberate and slow as he reached for the door handle. Okay, we're cooperating. He glanced at Malik, his eyes urging him to stay calm. Both brothers stepped out of the car, their hands instinctively raised to shoulder level. The night air was cooler than it had been earlier, but a cold sweat broke out on Marcus's brow. The officer eyed them both before speaking into his radio. Suspects are out of the vehicle, requesting immediate backup. Suspects? Malik blurted, his voice rising. What are you talking about? We're not suspects in anything. Quiet! The officer snapped, his hand inching closer to his weapon. By now, the flashing lights of the additional patrol cars illuminated the road. 4 more officers emerged, their faces serious and unreadable, hands resting on their belts as they approached the scene. The twins exchanged a quick glance, both silently asking the same question. What is going on? One of the new officers, a woman with a sharp gaze and a clipboard, stepped forward. Sergeant Davis, what's the situation here? Davis, the officer, who had stopped the twins, didn't take his eyes off them. Suspicious activity. The vehicle matches the description from a bolo issued earlier this evening. Bolo? Marcus asked cautiously. What does that mean? What description? Shut your mouth, Davis barked, his flashlight now trained on Marcus's face. The officer with the clipboard frowned. What was the nature of the bolo? Davis hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. Armed robbery at a gas station on the edge of town. Perpetrators were described as 2 black males in their late teens or early 20s, driving a dark sedan. Malik's jaw dropped. You've got to be kidding me. We just came from basketball practice. We've never even been near that. Gas station. Enough! Davis shouted, his voice echoing through the quiet night. The female officer, whose name badge read Officer Reynolds, looked between Davis and the twins. Did dispatch confirm the plate numbers or provide any additional details? Because this doesn't seem... I said enough. Davis cut her off, his tone sharp. The escalating tension was palpable. Marcus took a deep breath, his heart pounding against his ribs. Officer Reynolds, he began, keeping his voice as calm as he could manage. We can prove where we've been. We were at the high school gym all evening. Coach Miller can vouch for us. Please, just call him. Reynolds hesitated, her brow furrowed. But before she could respond, Davis snapped, We're not taking their word for it. Search the vehicle. What? Malik exclaimed, stepping forward instinctively before Marcus grabbed his arm to hold him back. You have no right, Marcus protested, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. Davis smirked. Probable cause. Step back. The officers began searching the car, pulling open the doors and rifling through the back seat. Marcus and Malik stood helplessly on the roadside, their hands still raised as if surrendering to the weight of the moment. The humiliation burned in their chests as passing cars slowed to gawk at the scene, their headlights casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement. What are they even looking for? Malik muttered through gritted teeth. Marcus shook his head. I don't. No, man, just stay quiet. Let's not give them an excuse to make this worse. As the search continued, Officer Davis's radio crackled with static before a voice came through. Bolo update. Suspects spotted heading westbound on Highway 10 in a black SUV. Repeat, suspects are driving a black SUV. Reynolds turned to Davis. That's not even close to this vehicle. Davis frowned but didn't back down. Could have been a mistake. These 2 fit the description. No, we don't, Malik snapped, unable to hold back any longer. You're profiling us, plain and simple. Davis stepped forward, his face inches from Malik's. You watch your tone, boy, unless you want me to find a reason to take. You in? Marcus quickly stepped between them, raising his hands higher. Please, sir, we just want to go home. We haven't done anything wrong. Reynolds sighed audibly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were heading. Sergeant Davis, we need to reassess. The bolo has been updated. This doesn't align with the suspect's vehicle or location. But Davis ignored her, his focus still on the twins. Empty your pockets, he barked at Malik. Malik hesitated, his fists clenching at his sides. Marcus gave him a pleading look, silently begging him to comply. Reluctantly, Malik pulled out his phone, wallet, and a crumpled receipt, tossing them onto the hood of the car. Davis inspected the items as if searching for something incriminating. When he found nothing, he turned back to Marcus. "Your turn." The process repeated, with Marcus emptying his pockets and standing silently as Davis scrutinized his belongings. The air was thick with tension, the quiet night now a scene of chaos and mistrust. The twins, once full of laughter and life, now stood stripped of their dignity, their hearts heavy with the realization that no matter how good they tried to be, they would always be seen as suspects first. Finally, Officer Reynolds spoke again, her voice firm. "Sergeant, this has gone too far. The bolo doesn't match and you found nothing in their vehicle or on their persons. We need to let them go." Davis looked at her, his jaw tightening. For a moment it seemed like he might argue, but the weight of her words and the attention from the other officers forced him to relent. "Fine," he said gruffly, stepping back. "But they're on thin ice. Don't think I'll forget. Your faces." The officers returned to their cars one by one, leaving Marcus and Malik standing on the roadside, their belongings scattered across the hood of their car. Malik's shoulders slumped as he gathered his things, his hands trembling slightly. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his brother's back, his own anger simmering just beneath the surface. As they climbed back into their car and drove away, the weight of what had just happened settled over them like a heavy fog. This wasn't about one officer or one night, but the system that allowed this to happen many times. For Marcus and Malik, this was more than a traffic stop. It was a reminder of the world they lived in, a world that saw their skin before seeing their humanity. And as they drove home in silence, the brothers knew they couldn't stay silent about what had happened. This was only the beginning of their story. The drive back home was steeped in silence, the kind that screamed louder than words. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against his dark skin. Malik sat slumped in the passenger seat, staring blankly out the window. The engine hum was the only sound between them, but the weight of what had happened weighed heavily in the car. Malik broke the silence first, his voice low and bitter. "Man, we were one wrong move away from not making it home tonight." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I know," he said, his voice barely audible. The words hung in the air, unspoken fears and frustrations mingling with the cold realization that their safety could be snatched away so easily. When they arrived home, their mother, Angela, was waiting by the door. Her face lit up with relief when she saw them, but her expression quickly shifted to concern as she noticed their subdued demeanor. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "You're late. I was getting worried." Marcus and Malik exchanged a glance. Neither wanted to relive the ordeal, but they knew they couldn't keep it from her. "We got stopped," Marcus began, his voice steady but hollow. "They said we matched the description of some suspects." Angela's brow furrowed and she stepped closer. "Stopped? For what? Did they hurt you?" Malik shook his head, but the bitterness in his tone was unmistakable. "No, they just treated us like criminals. Searched the car, searched us, called for backup like we were some kind of threat." Angela's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flashing with anger. "This is why I worry every time you leave the house," she said, her voice trembling. "It doesn't matter how good you are, how polite you are, or how much you've achieved. To them, you're just—" Her voice cracked, and she didn't finish the sentence. Marcus stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. "We're okay, Mom. We're okay," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. But Malik wasn't ready to let it go. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. "I'm calling Coach. Miller, he'll back us up. Those who think they can get away with this against us are wrong." Angela looked at her younger son, her expression a mix of pride and apprehension. "Malik, what are you planning to do?" I don't know yet, he admitted, his voice shaking with anger. But we can't let this slide. It's not just about us, it's about every kid like us who has to go through this. Marcus nodded, his resolve hardening. He's right. If we don't speak up, nothing will change. The next day, armed with their coach's testimony and the knowledge that they had done nothing wrong, the brothers decided to file a formal complaint against Officer Davis. They contacted a local community activist, Ms. Ramirez, who was known for her work in holding law enforcement accountable. When they met with her, Marcus was struck by her calm yet determined demeanor. She listened intently as they recounted the events of the previous night, her pen flying across her notebook as she jotted down every detail. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time I've heard a story like this, Ms. Ramirez said, her voice heavy with frustration. But every story matters, every voice counts, and if you're willing, we can make sure your voices are heard. Malik leaned forward, his eyes blazing with conviction. We're willing. What do we need to do? Ms. Ramirez gave them a small, encouraging smile. First, we gather evidence. Do you have any recordings of the incident? Marcus shook his head. No, we didn't think to record anything. That's okay, she said. We can request dashcam footage from the officers' vehicles, and your coach's testimony will help. But more importantly, we'll need to tell your story publicly. More people will know about what happened, making it harder to ignore. The story began to gain traction after Ms. Ramirez helped the twins share their experience on social media. Marcus and Malik were initially concerned about sharing their faces and pain, but as the likes, shares, and supportive comments poured in, they began to see the impact their story was having. A local news station picked up the story, interviewing the twins and their mother in their modest living room. Marcus spoke with calm determination, recounting the events of that night with measured words that belied the anger simmering beneath the surface. On the other hand, Malik's raw and unfiltered words cut through the screen with the intensity of someone pushed too far. The turning point came when their story reached a national platform. A prominent civil rights attorney, Mr. James Carter, reached out to offer his assistance. What happened to you is part of a larger pattern, he said during their first meeting. And it's time we shine a light on it. The twins found themselves at the center of a growing movement, their story sparking protests and calls for accountability. The once quiet neighborhood where they lived became a hub of activity, with people gathering to march for justice. During one particularly large rally, Marcus took the microphone, his heart pounding in his chest as he looked out at the sea of faces before him. My brother and I aren't the first to go through this, he began, his voice strong despite the nervousness fluttering in his stomach. And sadly, we won't be the last. But we have a choice. We can stay silent or we can speak out. We choose to speak. The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy washing over him like a wave. Malik joined him on stage, his arm around his brother's shoulders. This isn't just about us, Malik said, his voice ringing out over the crowd. It's about making sure no one else has to feel the fear and humiliation we felt that night. It's about justice. It's about change. As the crowd chanted their names and the movement continued to grow, Marcus and Malik felt something they hadn't felt since that fateful night. Hope. They realized that their voices and stories could change things for the first time. And though the road ahead would be long and challenging, they were ready to walk it together side by side. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Marcus and Malik sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, their mother, Angela, holding their hands tightly. Across the room sat Officer Davis, his expression stoic, but his discomfort evident in the way he fidgeted with his pen. The civil rights attorney James Carter stood at the podium, his voice steady and commanding. This is not just about two young men being wrongfully stopped. This is about a system that allows such actions to go unchecked, a system that fails to see the humanity in the people it serves. Mr. Carter turned to Marcus and Malik, his gaze softening. Marcus and Malik are not criminals. They are students, athletes, sons and brothers. Yet on that night, they were treated as threats, as suspects, simply because of the color of their skin. The judge listened intently, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. The twins' story had already garnered national attention, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, and supporters. The turning point had begun weeks earlier, when the department's internal investigation concluded that Officer Davis had acted improperly. The dashcam footage, released under public pressure, showed the officer escalating the situation without justification. His repeated radio calls for backup, two suspicious males, possibly armed, painted a chilling picture of how quickly assumptions could spiral into danger. The footage showed Marcus and Malik standing with their hands raised, their voices steady yet trembling as they repeatedly asked why they were being detained. The stark contrast between their calm demeanor and Officer Davis's aggressive tone was undeniable. In the aftermath of the footage release, the public outrage was palpable. Protests grew larger, and calls for Officer Davis's suspension turned into demands for his termination. Community leaders, clergy, and even local politicians joined the movement, pushing for meaningful reforms. The courtroom trial became a flashpoint in the fight for justice. Marcus was the first to testify, his voice calm but filled with quiet strength. "When I saw those flashing lights, I wasn't thinking about anything illegal," he said, meeting the judge's gaze. "I was thinking about getting home to my mom. I was thinking about whether we'd survive the night." Malik followed, his testimony more impassioned. "We weren't a threat. We were scared kids. But to Officer Davis, that didn't matter. He saw two black boys and made up his mind." Their words resonated deeply, not just with the judge, but with everyone in the courtroom. Their courage to recount the trauma they had endured was a testament to their strength and resolve. The turning point came when Officer Davis himself took the stand. Under cross-examination, Mr. Carter's questions cut to the heart of the issue. "Officer Davis, can you explain why you assumed Marcus and Malik were armed?" "They matched a description," Davis replied, his voice faltering slightly. "Matched a description of what exactly? Two black males in hoodies? Isn't that a vague description that could apply to countless innocent people?" Davis hesitated. "I was doing my job." "Your job," Carter said, his voice calm but piercing, "is to protect and serve. Did you protect these young men that night, Officer Davis? Or did you endanger them based on an unfounded assumption?" The room was silent as Davis struggled to answer. His inability to justify his actions spoke volumes. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and tears. The judge ruled in favor of Marcus and Malik, awarding them damages and mandating mandatory racial bias training for the entire police department. Officer Davis was suspended without pay and placed under review for termination. But for the twins, the victory was about more than the verdict. They talked about the movement, conversations, and hope their story inspired their community. At a community rally following the trial, Marcus stood before a crowd of hundreds. His voice was strong, his words resonating with the same quiet power that had carried him through the ordeal. "This isn't just a win for us," he said. "It's a step forward for everyone who's ever felt invisible, underestimated, or targeted. It's proof that when we stand together, we can create change." Malik joined him on stage, his arm draped over his brother's shoulder. "We're not done yet," he said, his tone both fiery and determined. "This is just the beginning. We've got work to do, policies to change, systems to hold accountable. But we'll keep fighting and we'll keep speaking out." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the night. In the weeks that followed, the twins became vocal advocates for police reform, working with local organizations to push for new policies. Their story was featured on national news outlets, and they were invited to speak at universities, panels, and conferences. Angela watched her sons with pride, her heart swelling as she saw how their pain had been transformed into purpose. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, she turned to them and said, "You've turned something terrible into something powerful. I'm so proud of you." Marcus smiled, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You taught us to stand up for what's right." Malik nodded, his usual fiery demeanor softened. "And to never let fear silence us." Angela reached for their hands, her voice steady and filled with love. "And I'll always be here, reminding you of that." The resolution of their story wasn't just about winning a case or holding one officer accountable. It was about reclaiming their power, their voice, and their humanity. It was about standing up, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had been silenced, overlooked, or oppressed. And though the journey wasn't over, Marcus and Malik knew they had already made a difference. These people showed their community and the world that hope and resilience can change injustice. The story of Marcus and Malik is not just an isolated incident. It is a reflection of systemic issues that have persisted for generations. Their experience underscores the urgent need to confront racial bias and the disproportionate targeting of Black individuals by law enforcement. It's a reminder that the roots of such disparities run deep, embedded in historical injustices and perpetuated by policies and practices that too often go unchecked. Across the United States, studies consistently reveal stark disparities in how Black communities are policed. According to data from the ACLU, Black individuals are 64 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than white individuals, despite similar usage rates. Traffic stops, like the one Marcus and Malik endured, disproportionately target Black drivers, with many of these encounters escalating unnecessarily. These patterns are not accidental. They stem from a legacy of systemic racism that demands accountability and reform. Marcus and Malik's story highlights the emotional and psychological toll such encounters have on individuals and families. Angela, their mother, spoke candidly in an interview about the sleepless nights and constant fear she felt after that night. "Every time they step out, I worry if they'll come back," she said. Her words echo the sentiments of countless parents who grapple with the same anxiety, knowing their children are often seen as threats rather than human beings. This fear extends beyond families to entire communities. When stories like Marcus and Malik's emerge, they reinforce a collective trauma, a shared understanding that justice is not always evenly applied. This erodes trust in law enforcement, making it harder for officers to build meaningful relationships with the communities they serve. Experts like Dr. Rashad Williams, a sociologist specializing in race and policing, emphasize the broader implications. "When we fail to address the systemic biases in policing," he explains, "we create a society where entire demographics feel alienated from institutions meant to protect them. This is not just a policing issue, it's a societal issue." To understand the depth of these issues, it's essential to look at the historical context. The roots of racial bias in policing can be traced back to the post-slavery era, when Black codes and Jim Crow laws criminalized Black existence in subtle and overt ways. Practices like stop and frisk, redlining, and racial profiling are modern iterations of these historical injustices, designed to control and marginalize Black populations. The civil rights movement of the 1960s brought significant progress, but as the case of Marcus and Malik shows, the fight for racial equality is far from over. Their experience mirrors countless others, from the tragic deaths of individuals like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, to the everyday indignities faced by those whose stories never make headlines. Marcus and Malik's ordeal serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up to injustice. Their decision to fight back, through legal action, advocacy, and public speaking, has inspired others to speak out and demand change. Their courage highlights the importance of community support, as they could not have succeeded without the backing of activists, lawyers, and everyday citizens who rallied behind them. Their story also underscores the necessity of educating ourselves and others about implicit bias. Many officers, like Officer Davis, may not even realize the extent to which their actions are influenced by stereotypes. Training programs that address these biases, coupled with accountability measures, can help reduce the frequency of such incidents. As viewers, It's simple to feel disconnected from stories like Marcus and Malik's, especially if we haven't experienced such injustices ourselves. But their story challenges us to reflect on our own roles in creating a more equitable society. Ask yourself, what biases do I hold, and how can I confront them? How can I support policies and leaders that prioritize justice and equality? What can I do to amplify the voices of those who are often silenced? Their story is not just about two brothers. It's about all of us. It's a call to recognize our shared humanity and to act in ways that ensure everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, can live without fear of prejudice or discrimination. Despite the challenges, stories like Marcus and Malik's remind us that change is possible. Their courage to speak out, combined with the support of their community, led to tangible outcomes: a court victory, policy changes, and a renewed focus on police accountability. Change often begins with uncomfortable conversations and difficult truths, but it is in these moments that progress is born. By continuing to listen, learn, and act, we can help build a society where stories like Marcus and Malik's are no longer possible. A society where justice truly is blind and equality is more than just an ideal. Their journey is not over, and neither is ours. Together, we can ensure their story becomes a chapter in a larger narrative of progress and hope. A narrative written not just by a few, but by all of us. The story of Marcus and Malik is more than just a recounting of a tragic encounter. It is a powerful reminder of the courage it takes to stand up against injustice, the strength it requires to continue fighting when the odds seem impossible, and the unwavering hope that change is within our reach. But this story is not just about them. It's about all of us. It's about the world we want to build, the future we want to see, and the kind of society we choose to create together. We cannot afford to be silent. We cannot afford to stand by while injustice runs rampant. Each of us is empowered to make a difference, no matter how small it may seem, no matter how distant it may feel. The truth is, Marcus and Malik's story is happening every day in countless communities across the world. And while the names and faces may differ, the pain, the fear, and the hope are the same. The fight for equality, for justice, for dignity. This fight belongs to all of us. Now is the time for action. Marcus and Malik didn't just tell their story. They took steps to make sure their voices were heard. They fought for accountability, for their right to be seen as human beings, not threats. And so can you. You are empowered to amplify this message, to speak out, to act, to join a movement that demands justice, empathy, and equality. I urge you to reflect on the story you just heard. Consider the anger, fear, courage, resilience, and unwavering commitment to doing the right thing. What does it mean to you? How does it change the way you see the world, the way you see your community, and how you see each other? And most importantly, what will you do next? Share this story, share it with your friends, your family, and your neighbors. Start a conversation. Let people know that Marcus and Malik's story is not an isolated incident. It is a part of a larger fight that demands our collective attention. The more people who hear this message, the more powerful it becomes. But don't stop there. Challenge the biases you see around you. Challenge the assumptions, the stereotypes, and the systems that perpetuate injustice. Support organizations and leaders who are working toward real change. Engage with your community. Stand up for what's right. And hold those in power accountable. Together, we can create a society where people like Marcus and Malik are no longer seen as threats, but as human beings with the right to live, to thrive, and to be treated with the dignity they deserve. Together, we can ensure that no one is ever forced to fear a traffic stop, and no one is ever unjustly detained or discriminated against simply because of the color of their skin. Remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. It requires each of us to do our part, to push back against the systems that oppress, and to stand in solidarity with those who are most affected. But if we stay united, if we remain committed to this fight, then together, we will create a world where justice, empathy, and unity are not just ideals, but the reality for everyone. As you watch this, ask yourself, what are you willing to do for change? Are you willing to speak up when you see injustice? Are you willing to challenge the status quo even when it's difficult? Are you ready to stand alongside those who fight for a better, more just world? If the answer is yes, then take action now. Engage with this channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories that spark change. Together, we can create the world we deserve, a world where everyone is treated with respect, where justice is not a privilege but a right for all. The fight isn't over, it's just beginning. And together, we can ensure that Marcus and Malik's story is the turning point for many more who are still waiting for their voices to be heard. Let's stand up, let's speak out, and let's create a world that finally truly believes in justice for all.